Thank you all for having me, and thank you to the wonderful speakers before me. I've learned so much in just sitting through the conversations and the talk. Like Dr. Holloway said, I'm going to discuss with you today about American Indian medicinal plants for menopause and part of my dissertation work that encompassed a collaboration with urban Indigenous women. And if it's hard to hear me or if my screen gets frozen, please let me know. I've been having some issues in previous talks, so I hope that doesn't happen today. Also, before I begin, I would like to make this disclaimer that when I'm referencing Indigenous Americans, American Indians, Indigenous people, or Native Americans, I'm speaking of Indigenous people who reside in the lower 48 states. Also, I'll take any clarifying questions at the end of this talk. So in the spirit of healing, I acknowledge and honor the original peoples of the Chicagoland area, which UIC is situated on, the Three Fired Confederacy, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Ojibwe nations, as well as over 150 other tribes that know this area, including the Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Miami, Peoria, and Sac and Fox. Chicago is home to one of the largest urban Indigenous communities in the United States, primarily due to policies such as the 1954 Tribal Termination Act and the 1956 Relocation Adult Vocation Training Act. Native people are still here and will forever be in the Chicagoland area. I also want to acknowledge the original stewards of the land of North Dakota. This includes the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara, three affiliated tribes, the Spirit Lake Nation, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, and the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate Nation, and the ancestral land that UND resides on, including the lands of the Pembina and the Red Lake bands of Ojibwa and Dakota Oyate, presently existing as composite parts of the Red Lake, Turtle Mountain, White Earth bands, and the Dakota tribes of Minnesota and North Dakota. Now, as the University of Illinois and its system and most other land-grant institutions, they occupy and benefit from the stealing of Indigenous land based on the Morrill Land Act of 1862. We have a responsibility to Native American communities in the United States. And as a Black woman with American Indian ancestry, I commit to creating inclusive environments for Native and Indigenous people in my teaching, my mentoring, my scholarship, and all of my activities. And my work will continue to build trust and reciprocity with tribal communities. And if you want to learn more about land acknowledgements and how to make it a verb, please visit the QR code listed on my slide. I also don't have any relevant financial disclosures in relation to the content of this presentation. So let's begin with the learning objectives. For today, my hope is that by the end of this presentation, you will review the reasons for the decline of pharmaceutical treatments and the rise of botanical treatments for menopausal symptoms. Use the provided resource that I give to you to help identify traditional American Indian medicinal plants. Discuss one of the highest selling botanical herbs, its efficacy for menopause that were or are currently being used by American Indian tribes. And then also to discuss my dissertation research that used a community-based participatory research model to help tell the story of some of these traditional American Indian medicinal plants' potential activity. And so, as Dr. Holloway stated, my degree is in pharmacognosy, and that's making medicines for plants. And so for me, I'm actually trained as a bench scientist. So I'm hoping to have a conversation about this if we have time to just talk about how I did that research and how I'm applying it and how I applied it for doing community-based participatory research. So to give you a little bit of background, women may deal with health issues that are gender specific, such as premenstrual syndrome, pregnancy, and menopause. And in some cases, these women's health issues are regulated by hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers. They carry information and instructions from one group of cells to another and are responsible for regulating several physiological systems in the body, including the immune, cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, and cerebral systems. Hormones also regulate growth, development, tissue function, reproduction, metabolism, and sexual function. So for women, hormonal balance of the two steroidal sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, they are important in maintaining good health and preventing disease. And one of the two steroidal sex hormones, estrogen, is primarily discussed in maintaining healthy hormone balance for women's health. And the most common estrogens found in the female body are estrone, or E1, estradiol, E2, or estrol, E3. So specifically during menopause, women may experience physiological changes due to low levels of estrogen. And some of these changes include affecting the central nervous system, bone health, and changes in the genital urinary system, which can be displayed as several symptoms, such as vasomotor symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, vaginal atrophy, and mood swings. Now, to treat these symptoms, traditional pharmaceutical treatment included Prempro, which is basically taking estrogen plus progestin, which are effective in reducing hot flashes, insomnia, and hip fractions. However, after 2002, usage of hormone therapy declined due to the results from the Women's Health Initiative study. And also at this time, as you can see to the left, to the right here, you're right, my right too. In the Time magazine, it says the truth about hormones. Hormone replacement therapy is riskier than advertised what's women to do. And I'll get to that a little bit later about some of the different alternatives that women use. But in this study, with over 16,000 healthy postmenopausal women between the ages of 50 and 79 years, they examined placebo versus Prempro, which is the hormone therapy. And this study was planned for 8 years. However, it had to be stopped after 5.5 years due to the adverse health outcomes, including a 26% increase in breast cancer, 29% increase in heart attacks, 41% increase in stroke, and 22% increase in total cardiovascular disease in those who were taking Prempro versus the placebo. So as a graduate student, to counteract or to identify other alternatives to hormone therapy, I trained under the UIC NIH Botanical Center, and their primary interest was in studying alternatives to hormone therapy and chemopreventive agents in response to the 2002 Women's Health Initiative results that show that hormone therapy can cause an increased risk for breast cancer, among other adverse outcomes. Now, one of the goals were to test botanical alternatives that could alleviate menopausal symptoms by targeting the estrogen receptor, and to examine the same-sex specific pathways to identify chemopreventive plants that could possibly be useful for breast cancer. So I became interested in American Indian plants because I noticed that most of the common plants used for issues such as menopause were from American Indian ethnobotany. And I'll tell you after this slide what ethnobotany is, but these plants include black cohosh, which is shown here, red clover, and also hops. Now, the department that I worked in had a great collaboration with the Chicago Botanic Garden, and the Chicago Botanic Garden was working on a project to source or to obtain seeds and also plant seedlings and plants of native plant species for the center. So as an ethnobotany student with some American Indian ancestry, I wanted to learn more about the plants that were historically used by American Indians. And after digging deeper in the literature, I learned that there were still numerous botanicals historically used by American Indian women that have yet to be investigated. And my hope as a researcher was to work with American Indian communities to help tell their story of these plants. And so I'll get to that a little bit later. But take a step back, if you don't know, ethnobotany is the study of humans' interactions with plants. This can include food, religious practices, plants for shelter, for recreation, and also medicinal. And my concentration was medical ethnobotany, which is the study of traditional knowledge and practices of plants for medicinal purposes. And just to give you a little bit of history of where I come from a lineage of strong ethnobotanists. Dr. Schultes, who is shown on right here, he's known to be the father of modern ethnobotany. And he was my advisor, Dr. Dole Soyarto advisor, and he helped to bring light to resistant rubber in the Amazon. Now, my co-advisor, he's known for working with a National Cancer Institute, but he also to discover or to identify some cancer preventing properties from plants and also AIDS and HIV. But he also helped to identify the sugar alternative stevia that we use today. And so this is me as in my dissertation work. And, my hope is to, tell the story of the plants that I'm using in my research as well. So for Indigenous American ethnobotany, I use this source, and I think this source is a phenomenal resource that some of you can use if you haven't used it already outside of talking to some of your tribal leaders. This source is the Native American Ethnobotany. It is a database, but also it's a book that was developed by anthropologist Dr. Daniel Moorman, who spent 25 years compiling this information from published records on Indigenous tribes of North America. He is shown here with me, and I got a chance to meet him at one of the Society of Economic Botany meetings. This book was turned into a database in the late 1990s, and the database has over 44,000 items for plants used as drugs, dyes, fibers, and more by Indigenous Americans. Today, we're going to talk about some of the information that I got from this database about Black cohosh, and also some of the how this is being marketed for menopause and some of the scientific evidence on safety and efficacy of this plant. So in looking at recent market data from 2020, here you can see the top selling herbal supplements, and I know it's kind of small, but bear with me. I highlighted the red box, which shows that Black cohosh is listed at 17 as one of the top selling herbs. And now I'm going to discuss with you a little bit more about Black cohosh, and you may be familiar with this information. So Black cohosh, Latin name and plant part used is called Aetius or Semisafuga racemosa. The part that's primarily used is the root and the rhizome, so the part of the root that's above the ground. And other common names include the snake root, black bugbane, which is commonly used by Indigenous people, rattleweed, and the rheumatism weed. It's currently marketed as a menopause support supplement, as shown here. Now, as far as its traditional and tribal use and prep use, Black cohosh is considered a Cherokee drug and has been traditionally used as an abortifacient, analgesic, anti-rheumatic, cold remedy, cough medicine, a dermatological aid, a diuretic, laxative. It's used as a pediatric aid, a sedative, a stimulant, a tonic, and also a tuberculosis remedy for this tribe or tribes. It is a Delaware drug as a tonic and an Iroquois drug as an anti-rheumatic. It's also been used by that tribe as a blood medicine. And for the Mi'kmaq Nation, it is a drug for kidney aid. And for the Penobscot tribe, it's also used as a kidney aid. So as far as its laboratory research, we don't know much. There's been plenty of studies done, but the active ingredients and the potential mechanism of action are still unknown. So far, what data has shown that there is no estrogenic activity in vitro or in vivo. However, there may be some activity, such as being a selective estrogen receptor modulator. And what I mean by this, so for an example, an ideal SERM can be identified as one that behaves as an estrogen on the bone and the brain, which could be beneficial, but does not act the same in the uterus or the breast. And it also, this plant has also been studied for its potential selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor activity. And an SSRI, they're efficient in alleviating hot flashes in menopausal women. However, they have some side effects. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into some of the research that the UIC Botanical Center has done. And to give you a little bit of background, in our center, we investigated the binding activity of a potential serotonergic compound from Black cohosh, and this compound is shown here. And to go over the mechanism of the serotonergic activity, serotonin is released in the synapses and binds to its receptor 5-HT7 in the postsynaptic cells. Serotonin receptor coupled with a G protein activates adenylate cyclase, resulting in the production of CAMP or CAMP, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and activation of enzymatic cascades leading to the serotonin activity and effects. So one of the studies by my group, by Powell and colleagues in 2018 was published. And in this study, they looked at that CAMP induction assay. And if you look at the figure to the right, this compound demonstrated a strong ability to increase intracellular CAMP levels. So for this figure here, we see that CAMP formation could be reversed with this compound in conjunction with an antagonist SB, I'm just going to call it SB, which indicated the process was a receptor mediator. However, it's very active when it's alone. So figure B here, it shows that this action is also dose dependent. Furthermore, this compound exhibits some of that SSRI activity that I showed you before, and it's also dose dependent. And so we're just showing that here that it does have some serotonin potential. Now, outside of the lab-based work, we also in the center did some clinical investigations with black cohosh and some other traditional or local plants. So we examined a clinical extract of black cohosh, and the goal was to examine the safety, efficacy of daily administration of a standardized extract of black cohosh and red clover versus a placebo. Now, this study design was a 4-arm, double-blind, placebo-controlled, positive control conjugated, and I'm not going to pronounce that positive control, but the study lasted for 12 months. The primary outcome that we measured, or the center measured, was the reduction in vasomotor symptoms. And then the secondary outcome was looking at the safety evaluation, reduction of somatic symptoms, relief of sexual dysfunction, and overall improvement of quality of life. And in that clinical trial, we have some of the baseline characteristics. And as you can see, the participants, the total number of participants were 88 women. They are from a diverse background. Their age range around 53 years, and 43% of them have previous use of hormone therapy. So in this study, we can see that black cohosh or red clover did not significantly improve menopausal symptoms. So if you look at the figure to the left, we see that there was a reduction of hot flash intensity. So all treatments reduced intensity of hot flashes. However, at 6 and 9 months, the black cohosh group showed higher symptom intensity compared to the placebo. So that was significant, which is what we did not expect. And the reduction in hot flash frequency, we see that black cohosh and red clover, they did reduce hot flash frequency. However, it was not significant, but Prempro, which is the marketed pharmaceutical treatment, was. So this leaves us still with the question of, as far as the literature, is it effective or not? And as far as clinical studies, is it effective or not? And we still have to work on that to figure that out from a researcher perspective. Now, as far as the safety evaluation, it's considered to be safe. It does not have any influence on the endometrial thickness or hormones. It doesn't influence liver parameters. It also there has been shown 83 case reports concerning liver damage. So what certain countries have added to their label when they're selling black cohosh is that there may be some liver safety issues. However, to my knowledge and what's published in the literature, there are no studies or hardly any studies that look at the interactions. So as far as we know, there are no known interactions with medications. So I gave you an example of one plant that has been investigated for its potential to treat menopausal symptoms. and it also has some Indigenous American traditional uses. Now I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about my dissertation research. So my dissertation project focused on pharmacognosy, which is as I mentioned before, the study of developing medicines from plants and natural products and medical ethnobotany research with urban American Indian women. I'm going to discuss with you a little bit about how I went from the bench work and did community work and why I felt this was important to me. So I had two primary goals for my dissertation project. The first was a pharmacognosy aim, and in that aim, I wanted to identify estrogenic extracts and compounds that could be used as alternatives to hormone therapy or chemopreventive agents among local, traditionally used American Indian plant species. My second aim had an ethnobotany focus, where the goals were to perform a medical ethnobotany survey to identify the current uses of the tested plants, also to understand how urban American Indian women perceived and experienced menopause. So the first aim, just to give you a little bit of background, the source of the plants that I obtained were derived, like I said before, from the Chicago Botanic Garden. We had an MOA with the Botanic Garden in 2005. It was established to investigate Illinois native plant species, but when I got there, I'm like, we have to look at the traditional uses of these plants. Now, most of these plants are considered at risk because the majority of their natural habitat, such as the tall grass prairie area, was converted to agricultural land. But so far in that sample, there are 400 samples that we had from the Chicago Botanic Garden, and out of 400 of those samples, there were 164 different plant species. Now, out of all of those plants, I identified 15 plant samples from the Chicago Botanical Garden collection to start screening for their estrogenicity. So I wanted to determine if they had estrogenic activity or if they were anti-estrogenic. I selected these plants because they had traditional uses by American Indians, and based on the literature, they had some activity that was published and that I thought would be interesting, such as anti-inflammatory activity or uses by women, traditional uses by women. What I did, I performed a methanol extraction with all 15 plants, and out of the 15, 3 demonstrated significant activity in several assays. So I'm going to try to highlight those 3 with my marker. We have here Silphium perfoliatum. Also, we have, I'm trying to find it here, Silphium perfoliatum here, also known as cup plant, Amorphokinesis, also known as lead plant, and roundhead Lespedeza. Now, lead plant was previously used by the Omaha tribe as an anti-rheumatic. Silphium perfoliatum was previously used as an abortifacient by the Chippewa and Meskwaki tribe, and Lespedeza capitata was used by the Omaha and the Ponca tribes as an anti-rheumatic. So just to give you an example of just what this may look like in the lab setting, I used an assay called the Ishikawa assay. And so, like I said, I wanted to determine the estrogenicity of these extracts. So whether it had an estrogenic activity or anti-estrogenic activity. So if you could put your focus on the table, I tested lead plant, cup plant, and then in this figure here, roundhead Lespedeza. And we have a positive control of estradiol and our negative control, which is anti-estrogenic, which is 4-H tamoxifen. Another positive control, for anti-estrogenicity was 4-H tamoxifen. And what we see is that lead plant and had similar anti-estrogenic activity, such as our control 4-H tamoxifen. However, it was slightly toxic. And then cup plant has some activity as well, anti-estrogenic activity, while roundhead Lespedeza has some dose-dependent estrogenic activity, such as our positive control estradiol. Now, I was able to get rid of this cytotoxicity by doing several fractionation, which I'll get to a little bit later. But, I was able to get rid of that cytotoxicity, and I decided to focus on lead plant. So since I started with a very small sample of lead plant, and just to give you the idea of the breadth of the research that goes with pharmacognosy research, I had to recollect the plants. I recollected it, as you can see here, botanically, chemically, and biologically verified it. Here's a picture of me collecting lead plant from DeKalb, Illinois. This sample was inserted in the John G. Searle Herbarium at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. I also cultivated the plants, as you can see here, at the UIC's Atkins Garden, and that's on the, if you ever come to Chicago, it's on the corner of Polk and Wood. I botanically verified by comparing the live plant material with the original sample using microscopy and macroscopy as seen here. And I also verified the chemical fingerprint because plants grow at different season, time frames, they produce different compounds depending on what stress they're being presented with. So I had to verify that they had similar compounds. And the new sample is in pink and the old sample is in black. And this is my positive control here. But as you can see, they're very similar in their chemical constituents. So this may be a lot, but I'm gonna try to walk it through you. So next, I had to isolate the active compounds from lead plants. I used two methods side by side. I'm going to start with the method to the left. This is called MagMass, and we actually me and my collaborators published this method. But basically how this works is that you can quickly isolate bioactives that binds to the protein receptor of interest. And in this case, we use the estrogen receptor alpha. And there's three major steps where you incubate the extract with the receptor. And then you bind, you take a magnetic bead, and this receptor is bound to a magnet. Then you take a magnetic bead and collect all of the bound and receptor ligand, and then you use this magnet, and then that will release those that did not bound when you wash it out, and then you dissociate the ligand from the bound receptor, and then you run liquid chromatography mass spectrometry, and that is a way to quickly tell us from an extract out of all the thousands of compounds what actually binds to the receptor of interest. But I also did another method, which is the classical method, where you start with an extract and then you do several partitioning phases. So if you could think about this as, you know, you have oil, liquid, oil, water, and vinegar, for example. If you put them in a jar, they'll form these different layers. And so compounds that like the oil layer, once you add your extract, compounds that like the oil layer will go to the oil phase, compounds that like the water layer will go to the water phase, compounds that like the, you know, acid layer will go to the acid phase. So that's the type of process that I did. And then after I separated it out from each step or partitioning step, we found out that the chloroform partition is the one that we wanted to focus on, and it had activity without the toxicity. And then you test that back into the Ishikawa assay that I showed in the previous slide. And then you do more separation and then you test it back. So that process is called bioacyclic fractionation. So I was able to do that. And what we found is that this fraction 12 had the ligand from the MagMass. So it had what bound to the estrogen receptor. And we were able to isolate and elucidate those compounds. And I feel like this is a lot. But we were able to isolate centoserin A, and which is a known compound, and centoserin J, which I was able to publish. So that's the whole lab work, the bench work. Now, translating that over to the community side. Like I said before, the second aim of this project was to identify current uses of the tested plant with urban American Indian women, and to understand how urban American Indian perceived and experienced menopause. And I felt that this aim was very important being a bench scientist, because when I was reading about menopause for Native women, I felt like their voices wasn't heard, especially for urban women. Also, I wanted to understand a little bit more about the current uses of the plants that I investigated. And so in my work for the second aim, like I said, I'm very passionate about it. And for me, you know, when I was growing up, my grandmother, who is African-American, She would tell me about her childhood and the plants she used for medicinal purposes when she lived in Mississippi. And so coming into my program, I knew that I wanted to do this type of work. And when I transitioned from the bench work, I wanted to gain a holistic picture of the plants that I used. And so for this aim, I worked with the community at every step. I was active in the community for 2 years before even asking a question. I enlisted stakeholders and key players to assist in the research planning and implementation. I worked with community members to recruit and retain participants. I even had a community member co-facilitate the data collection, which we did a focus group platform, and also assist in the data interpretation. I presented the findings back to the community, and also I'm working on a publication with community members about this experience. And so the study design for this were focus group conversations or discussion. To the left, I just give you the IRB number, and we used a very because I had to graduate, used a very solidified and quick method called modified rapid ethnographic assessment. I did audio record the focus groups. I gave them I had an interview guide, but also I gave the participants a biodemographic sheet. And to the right, you can see just some of the questions that I asked. And it was a semi-structured interview. Now, I did 3 focus groups. The first 2 were planned. The third location, it just came up because one of the women was like, you need to go here. So I'm very gracious to the community in Chicago for their willingness to talk to me, and also for their generosity in the process. But I interviewed 32 American Indian women from these 3 sites. One of the sites was the American Indian Center of Chicago at their previous location. The second site was the St. Kateri Center of Chicago, and the third site was the Wise Women Gathering Place in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I had a diverse representation of different tribes from the United States, 17 different tribes with diverse or tribal affiliation. So basically, I asked women what is their home tribe, and they gave me their what they consider their home tribe. And this is a list or a schematic of those tribes here with how many people consider this as their home tribes. And some of these women were intertribal as well. Now, when I asked them about their home tribe, there was also other questions too about the average age of starting menopause, which was 47. 62% of these women were postmenopausal. However, all of the women did experience menopausal symptoms, and 5 women did resort to medical treatment for their symptoms. Now, when I asked them about visiting their home tribes, majority visited at least once a year, but there were some women who were permanent residents who visited less than once a year, or who have never visited their home tribe. So keep that in context when we're talking about the results from the focus group. So one of the questions I asked was, what are your symptoms that you experienced when you were experiencing menopause? And primarily, this data was from the biodemographic sheet, but it matches the data from the focus group. And primarily, majority of the women said that they had hot flashes, difficulty sleeping, and night sweats. And in conversation, though, a lot of women talked about their rage, which I thought was interesting, how they classified, like, I would just get upset and don't know why, just take moments away from my family. And I could get into a little bit more about that when we talk about some of the perceptions and experiences. But these were the top 3 symptoms experienced, which were hot flashes, difficulty sleeping, and night sweat. Most women interviewed did not treat their symptoms, but let them pass naturally, as you can see here in this column. Some of them also resorted to some pharmaceuticals. Others would just like exercise. Or when I put manual here, this is from just like, for this one, it'd be like just go to the bathroom. But, others would just use a fan. That's another manual thing. But there were primarily, majority of the women did not treat their symptoms. So when I discussed the question about how would they rate their medicinal plant knowledge, there were very few women that knew much about medicinal plant knowledge. And a lot of the women attributed this to historical trauma. And as we talked about before, being displaced off your reservation, or, being sent to boarding school. So all of this, they said that it attributed to their loss of medicinal plant knowledge. And investigated plants that were my investigated plants. So black cohosh, not black cohosh, sorry. Roundhead lespedeza, cup plant, and lead plant. These women have never heard of these plants. They haven't used them. They don't know any traditional uses for them. However, there were still some plants that were used that women talked about, and these are some of the traditional plants that many women, Western women, use for their menopausal symptoms, such as black cohosh, which we talked about, ginkgo to help with their ability to concentrate, black ash for their hot flashes, hibiscus to control weight gain, just a tea to help with sleeping, lavender oil, and also to help with sleeping, and St. John's wort to help their mood. One of the plants also that I didn't know anything about was red raspberry. And they said it helped for the women who were premenopausal, help with their flow or their menstrual flow irregularities. Other plants that were used that I thought was interesting was cedar. Women would take a cedar bath, and I know this has a lot of connections to several tribes and their traditional uses of plants. Red raspberry leaf tea, and a lot of these from the demographic sheet also align with a focus group such as black cohosh, but others are like strawberry teas, cold sage tea, soy, mint tea, a lot of teas that women use to help with their symptoms. Like I said, I thought it was interesting that cedar was used, and so, hopefully in the future I can explore that more. And this is just pictures of these plants here. So this is the interesting things from the data. When I asked about menopause perceptions, I felt like they were either positive, negative, or indifferent. So if you can read some of the quotes, some women was like, hot flashes. Other women, I'm getting old, and they laugh about it. Others felt like they can't have any children anymore, and that could have been a good or a bad thing. Some women thought it was miserable. I always think that, you're crabby and hot flashes and you're just crazy. Another woman said that I always thought it before I got older, I thought it had very negative connotations, but due to the media, like commercials and all this stuff, they made you feel like, oh my goodness, this is really, life will be over, which I didn't think it was that way at all. Some other women had anxiety about it. Another woman quoted that I was happy, no more periods, period. And so it was good conversation. This is one of the elder women who was talking. She connected it with her tribal affiliations and her thoughts about the life cycle. And she said, your circle's almost complete, and that you should be happy that you were able to complete this many cycles in your life, your baby, your youth, your teen, your adult, and then finally your senior or elder period. So after she kind of talked with us and explained it like that, for me, I just started to go into it. So she was relating this back to how one of her, I think her grandmother discussed with her what it meant to be an elder and what it meant to go through menopause. In summary, though, women's perception of menopause felt that it was a natural process, both positive and negative connotations. And for the population that I talked with, one of the biggest things that I noticed at all three sites is that they did not discuss this health issue at all. A lot of women correlated to the monarch or the moon, and they wanted to have more ceremonies to acknowledge this menopausal transition. A lot of them, they felt fear at this age because they did not know what to expect. They did not know what was going to happen to them physically, emotionally, all of that. And because it wasn't talked about in the community, and they also felt that their healthcare providers wasn't providing this information in a culturally safe and cultural environment for them to understand what it meant to go through this process in life. So again, and there was an invisibility of menopause recognition. So many women mentioned that they, like I said, did not discuss menopause with their family or even other women in the community. And they only knew about menopause when they started to experience symptoms. So here's some quotes. My mother never talked about it. I thought women her age was just nuts. I never talked about it with my mother or grandmother, and don't talk about it because it's too personal. So some of the implementation items. A lot of women wanted to start talking circles to talk about their health issues, but not just for women. They wanted to do it transgenerationally. Another thing, like I mentioned before, is that they want to have a menopausal ceremony to acknowledge that they're becoming an elder in their community. And again, they wanted to discuss this across generations, across male and females. They wanted to discuss all of their health issues, not just menopause, but other women's health issues. They felt that there can be more Indian Health Services involvement with addressing menopause for this community, and not only at the local level, but the state and national level. And they wanted to learn more about medicinal plants. So I felt that, in summary, overall, the participants were excited to share their stories, but what I learned is that around menopause and other women's health issues for Indigenous women that I interviewed, they did not talk about their health issues. They did not treat menopause. However, they wanted to learn more about the traditional plants. I believe my research made an impact in the community because one of the things that the participants wanted to see were more outlets to talk about women-related issues. And as a result, one of the sites that I worked with started a monthly talking circle. And I'm pretty sure everybody here knows what a talking circle is. But I felt that, coming from the perspective of this being a common issue, it was rarely talked about. And I'm interested to hear from some of the practitioners here who are in Indian Health Service. How do they address this in their local settings? So with that being said, I'm short on time. But thank you. Here are all of my acknowledgements. To the left are my dissertation committee, in the middle are my funding, and to the right are my current mentors and support system. If you have any questions or want to reach out to me, you can also reach me at my email here. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak at this, and thank you so much for listening.